This video is part 2 in a 2-part series. You can watch part 1 by clicking the link on the top right of your screen. As civil war raged between the Qing dynasty and Taiping rebels, Rengan, cousin to the Heavenly King and one of his first converts, was missing in action. So far, he's been trapped as a private citizen in the British colony of Hong Kong. But perhaps that's what God wanted from him, because Rengan's years spent with the foreigners would transform him into one of the best connected and most forward-thinking men in China. Rengan first fled to Hong Kong to escape Qing troops hunting down members of the Heavenly King's family. While there, he studied in foreign schools and worked for foreign employers. Through his labor, he'd learn much of the outside world and make many Western friends, especially among the influential missionary community. The foreigners were equally fascinated by Han. He was one of the only men in the city with first-hand knowledge of the Taiping movement. But soon he would have to leave his new friends to take advantage of an opportunity to travel to Nanjing, where he would arrive in April of 1859. The Heavenly King was overjoyed to see his cousin for the first time in 10 years. Rengan would quickly be informed as the Shield King, and to take full advantage of his knowledge and connections with the foreign community, was made the new head of foreign affairs. But Rengan wouldn't just use his position to secure good relations with the Western powers. He would go as far as try to reform Chinese civilization itself. Rengan's agenda was laid out in a long memorandum to the Heavenly King. Among his many proposals was to adopt Western building standards, establish central banking, improve infrastructure by building a national highway system and digging new canals, create a patent office and national postal service, implement life and property insurance, criminalize infanticide, abolish the death penalty, and to create a new nationwide network of local and regional newspapers, along with a government minister whose job it would be to gather the news and deliver it to the Heavenly King untampered. Ever the scholar, Xiuquan read and annotated the memorandum himself, approving of every one of Rengan's reforms except for 2. First, he wanted to keep the death penalty, and second, he wanted to put off the creation of the newspaper system until after the Civil War, for fear it would destabilize a Heavenly Kingdom already reeling from the recent coups. As head of foreign relations, Rengan opened Nanjing to foreign missionaries, greeting them in perfect English and shaking hands with them in the Western style. When discussing the potentially divisive matter of theology, he told the foreigners little white lies, like how Xiuquan's claims to godly parentage were more a metaphor than the literal truth. Rengan's vision for China was to turn it into a modern, industrialized nation-state, one that would join the international system as a co-equal great power, and to have it all ruled by an autocratic theocracy under the brother of Christ. The only catch was that if his vision were to ever be implemented, he would first have to win the Civil War. And Rengan even had a plan to do that too. So you can call me Ezekiel. And this is the Taiping Civil War. But first, let me tell you about this video's sponsor, our supporters on the CallMeEzekiel Patreon. It's because of our patrons that we're able to release a fully illustrated documentary like this one every 2 weeks, and make each one better than the last. So help us continue to create and improve our content by clicking the link in the description and becoming a supporter. All of our patrons get rewards in proportion to their level of support, including a special role on our Discord server commensurate with your tier, and access to private chat rooms where you'll have direct access to me and our other supporters, adding a Countryball to the group shot featured at the end of each video, getting your name into the credits, possibly with extra pizzazz at higher support levels, as well as getting additional Countryballs put into the group shot. And finally, and only for our biggest supporters, I'll read your name out loud at the end of every video. This channel is only possible because of our supporters, so it would make me so happy for you to join them. Even a few dollars a month can make a huge difference. The links to our Patreon and other options to support us like crypto are in the description. Thank you for your support. And now, back to the video. Zeng Guofan was one of China's top scholar officials, in many ways the opposite of Xiuquan. Whereas the Hangs had only ever been rejected by the civil service system, Zhang passed his first exam at the remarkably young age of 22. By 1838, he passed enough exams to join the ranks of China's most powerful bureaucrats. While impressive, all of this meant that Zhang was not anyone's first choice to lead an army. The Civil War did little to affect Zhang until 1853. That year saw him return to his home province of Hunan to bury his dead mother. While there, he was selected by the increasingly desperate emperor to take control of the local military forces and restore order to the region. But Zhang had no military experience and was only in Hunan to fulfill his filial obligations. He would only change his mind after his own family begged him to accept the appointment. Thus began the military career of the man who would save the Qing dynasty. Zhang's first task was to review the condition of China's armed forces. What he found was not encouraging. The army had long been divided into two forces. First were the elite banner armies, composed of loyal Manchus and Mongols. Their role was to defend the emperor and the Manchu homelands in the north, as well as to guard the Manchu garrison cities throughout China. But Zhang would be taking command of troops from the second force, the Green Standard armies, which were composed of ethnic Chinese. Riddled with corruption and incompetence, the Green Standard suffered from poor morale and troop quality thanks to a lack of funds for equipment or even the soldiers' salaries. Zhang decided to create an entirely new army, structured according to the principles of Confucian social harmony. To Zhang, this meant that all recruitment would be done on the basis of direct personal connections between superior and subordinate. As head of the new army, Zhang would only recruit his direct subordinate officers. They would then go on to recruit their own direct subordinates, and so on, until all of the army's ranks were filled. These personal ties were so fundamental that if an officer did not personally know a soldier, he could not issue any legitimate orders to him. Zhang also avoided recruiting from the cities in favor of the countryside, where the men were hardier and more virtuous. He also did his best to pay and properly equip his troops, and to train them in both martial arts and Qing ideology. Finally, Zhang did not limit himself to land forces. He hired European advisors to design a brownwater fleet using the best technology available in China, which regrettably did not include steam power or iron armor, but it was nonetheless effective in the riverine amphibious operations common to the main theater of war. While Zhang was clearly a brilliant organizer, he turned out to be a terrible military commander. At first, he only led his army to defeats, but his lieutenants proved to be much more competent, so Zhang let them command his troops in the field, while he stuck to his specialties of organization and strategy. By 1854, Zhang's new army drove the Taipings out of Hunan province and pursued them into Hubei, liberating its capital of Wuchang in October. But his was the only front reporting victories. If the Qing dynasty were to survive the Civil War, it looked like Zhang was going to have to win it by himself. Han Rengan knew that the failed march on Peking meant that the Taipings were in for a long war, one that would require a whole new strategy to win. His first task would be to end the ongoing siege of Nanjing. The plan was to send an army to attack the siege camp supply base at Hangzhou. Then, when the camp diverted forces to protect their supplies, the army would force march back to the capital and destroy the weakened camp. But that was only the beginning of Rangan's plan. Immediately after securing the capital, the army would march east to capture the wealthy coastal city of Shanghai. The unequal treaties had allowed foreign traders into the city, bringing its already considerable wealth up to truly stunning proportions. But to the Shield King, the city housed a far greater treasure: the foreigners themselves. Han Rengan wanted to use Shanghai's wealth to finance a Western-built fleet of steam-powered warships. This fleet, far more powerful than anything the Qing or even Zeng Guofan had, would be used to dominate the Yangtze River Valley. This would both secure China's rich heartland and cut the Qing dynasty in two. From there, the Taipings could consolidate the entire national south. Victory would then be assured, because North China was fed by grain shipments from the south. Simply halting those shipments would be enough to starve the Qing into submission. Chosen to lead this campaign was the loyal king Li Zhuchang, a former farmhand turned one of the Taiping's finest generals. In the opening months of 1860, he brilliantly executed the plan to relieve the capital. He planted enough flags, tents, and fires to convince the garrison that they were facing a massive Taiping army. The garrison panicked, looted their own city, and fled. If not for the citadel guarded by the loyal Banner Army troops, the Taipings could have outright taken Hangzhou. But the loyal king prudently stuck to the plan and returned to Nanjing, where he smashed the Qing siege camp. It was time to march on Shanghai. Back in Peking, the emperor was reduced to truly desperate measures. With the siege of Nanjing broken, Zeng Guofan was the only major commander reporting victories. With no one left to turn to, the emperor directly appealed to Zhang for help, granting him the governor-generalship of Anhui, Jiangsu, and Jiangxin provinces. This made Zhang into the highest civil and military authority in the main theater of war. But if the emperor was hoping that this would make Zhang more obedient, he was sadly mistaken. Zhang's time as a military commander and first-hand experience in the imperial bureaucracy made him contemptuous of the often delusional orders he was receiving from the capital. So like many Chinese generals before him, Zhang would ignore the capital's orders to fight the war his own way. Zhang saw the Naian bandits and other smaller rebellions as a secondary threat compared with the Taipings, so he advocated for a defensive posture against them until the real threat was dealt with. Zhang believed that the Taiping's weakness was in their very capital at Nanjing, where the entire rebellion was centrally controlled from. Its loss would be enough to destroy the entire rebellion. But the last Qing attempt to take the city was a failure. What made Zhang think he could do any better? The answer is that Zhang knew the siege failed because they were only attacking from one side, allowing Nanjing to enjoy indefinite resupply until the siege could be broken. Zhang's plan would be far more practical and ambitious. To fully encircle Nanjing, Zeng Guofan would have to take control of the entire length of the Yangtze River. He envisioned a massive pincer movement starting in the east and west ends of the river and meeting in the middle at Nanjing. But he wasn't powerful enough to fight a two-front war himself yet, so Zhang would begin his plan in the west by besieging the city of Anching. As Zhang started up his siege at Anching, the loyal king continued his march on Shanghai. Good relations with the Westerners were key to the whole operation, so to avoid antagonizing the city's foreign community, the loyal king sent letters to our Western officials. These letters informed them that his only intention was to liberate Shanghai from the Qing, and that the Taipings meant the foreigners no harm. The Westerners responded by deploying troops and building fortifications to defend the city, contravening their very public and supposedly very strict neutrality policy. When the Taipings reached Shanghai in August of 1860, they were met by resistance from superior Western troops and mercenaries. The weak Qing forces they had expected to smash through hardly participated in the fighting at all. Many simply watched the battles while smoking opium. Remarkably, this battle for Shanghai coincided with the most intense phase of the Second Opium War, meaning that the Western powers had somehow maneuvered themselves into fighting against both sides of the Taiping Civil War at the same time. The Westerners clearly weren't satisfied with their repulse at Shanghai, so they went even further by demanding the Taipings clear an area of 30 miles around the city, and by forbidding their own merchants from supplying the rebels. So not only had Western meddling ended the stunning success of the Taiping 1860 campaign, but it ruined their whole war plan by making it impossible for them to buy their essential gunboats. Suddenly, Zeng Guofan's siege in the west, which could have easily been swept away by a modern flotilla, became a serious threat. The Taipings had to relieve the city the old-fashioned way. Over 100,000 men were dispatched from Nanjing to relieve Anching. But 20,000 Qing cavalry harassed them along the entire march, and soon the Westerners would decide to spoil this operation too. When the relief army reached Hongkou, another city open to foreign trade by the unequal treaties, they found it guarded by British gunboats. The Taipings begged the British to let them liberate the city, but the British not only threatened to defend the city, but also said that they would act if the Taipings took any of the nearby cities too. The relief forces' leadership became struck by a fatal bout of indecision. They wasted months trying to decide whether they should risk antagonizing the foreigners by attacking Hongkou anyway, or risk their supply lines by marching past it. All the while, Anching fell deeper into starvation. The relief force would eventually decide to march around the city, but their indecision meant that they'd arrive too late. Anching's garrison and relief force would coordinate some desperate attacks against Zhang's siege camp, but it was too well fortified to break. All the while, the 20,000 cavalry continued to harass them. On September 3, 1861, the Taiping garrison evacuated Anching, and Zeng Guofan's forces marched through its gates in triumph. Inside, they discovered that although the Taipings had long since run out of food, they were not all starving. The city had been sustained by a human meat market. As Zeng Guofan prepared to sail down the Yangtze, the Qing continued to lose ground everywhere else. The Nanjing rebels were still rampaging in the north. Muslims on China's western frontier rose up in rebellion, and the Taipings launched another Shanghai offensive. Always eager for another intervention, local British officials began to reconsider their nation's neutrality in the Civil War. They determined that a weak China under the geriatric Qing would serve British interests far better than a resurgent China under the energetic Taipings. The only thing holding them back from entering the conflict was an excuse, and the Taipings were trying their hardest not to give them one. To avoid a repeat of last time, the Taipings tried to convince the Qing garrison of Shanghai to surrender without a fight, but the plan was foiled by a freak snowstorm, which caused 2 feet of snow to fall in the otherwise hot and humid subtropics of Shanghai. This delayed and seriously damaged the Taiping forces, emboldening the Qing forces enough to fight on. Back in Anching, Zhang Guofan was trying to find a way to send forces to join the defenses of Shanghai. With the end of the Second Opium War, his former British enemies turned out to be the solution. After all, not only had the British never embargoed the Qing, its government still officially viewed them as the only legitimate government in China. This meant that unlike the Taipings, Zhang was allowed to contract a British firm to transport Qing soldiers down the Yangtze via steamboats protected by the British flag, which everybody knew that the Taipings would never risk firing on. So thanks to the Westerners, Zhang troops were in Shanghai in under a month. Not only would these reinforcements be instrumental to the city's defenses, but they would also form the nucleus of his eastern pincer towards Nanjing. Things got even better for the Qing when those hawkish British officials finally found their excuse to openly intervene in the conflict. This time, it came in the form of a celebration party for the newly promoted Taiping General Fan. Shots fired from festive cannons accidentally passed through the rigging of a French warship, killing several Chinese civilians when they landed. The British and French exploited this by demanding the Taipings totally dismantle all of their artillery batteries facing their forces. But the Allied troops were in the same locations as the Qing, making the demands impossible. The Taipings had no choice but to refuse. So just like that, the British and French had another excuse to go to war in China. So leave a party popper emoji in the comments to congratulate General Fan on his promotion. Once again, the Taipings were hopelessly outmatched by the professional Western forces. But the foreigners wouldn't fight for long, because they behaved horrendously during the entire campaign, regularly joining the Qing in committing atrocities, including mass torture and executions of women and children. At one point, the Allies secured the surrender of a key city in return for sparing its Taiping garrison, only for their Qing allies to slaughter the garrison anyway. This betrayal was so egregious that 10 nations signed onto a statement condemning the Qing for their, quote, extreme treachery abhorrent to human nature. These atrocities and betrayals made the intervention so unpopular that the Allies were forced to return to their semi-neutrality. But for the Qing, it was enough. The last major Taiping offensive to Shanghai was defeated, clearing the way for Zhang's eastern pincer to Nanjing. Qing victory was now in sight. In May of 1862, cholera broke out in Shanghai, spreading to the rest of China from there. This epidemic, combined with the devastation of the war, reduced much of China to famine. Reports of cannibalism became common. But neither that, nor desperate Taiping counterattacks could stop Zeng Guofan's siege of Nanjing. Inside the city, the Heavenly King's madness was intensifying. Xiuquan had never been in totally the right mind since his visions, but with catastrophic news pouring in from every front, he started to see enemies everywhere. The Heavenly King totally secluded himself in his palace, where only his most trusted advisors and family members were allowed to see him. Eventually, Rangan would be sent south on a desperate mission to rally forces to relieve the capital, but the armies were so demoralized that none were willing to risk it. When the failure of Rangan's mission became clear, Nanjing had become totally surrounded by siege works. A return to the capital was impossible, but none of that made Nanjing's defenses any less formidable. To fully surround the city, Zhang's army had to besiege and capture many smaller fortifications guarding its approaches. Only after the last fortress was taken could the city be fully encircled, and that was before dealing with any of the city's own defenses. There weren't any cannons large enough to destroy Nanjing's walls, but Zhang was able to place massive batteries on hills overlooking the walls to pummel the defenders inside. The walls themselves could only be destroyed by one of the over 30 massive tunnels being dug towards them. In spring of 1864, Xiuquan was informed that Nanjing had run out of food. Evoking Chapter 16 of Exodus, the Heavenly King ordered his subjects to begin eating manna, a food that the Bible never precisely describes. So with nothing else around, the Taipings made manna out of balls of weeds. The Heavenly King was the first to partake, almost certainly causing his illness in April. By June 1st, Xiuquan would succumb to it, and 5 days later, his teenage son, Hang Tianhui-fu, took the throne. On July 19th, Zhang's sappers successfully detonated a mine beneath Nanjing's walls, creating a 200-foot breach in them. Veterans beat their way past the emaciated defenders and made a beeline for the palace. They hoped to capture the Heavenly King alive, unaware that he had been dead for weeks already. The young king, however, was still very much alive and smuggled out of the city by top Taiping officials. So as Nanjing was mercilessly looted, the hunt for the young monarch began. The new Heavenly King was taken to Huzhou, where Rangan was leading the defenses. Even here, the Westerners continued to menace the Taipings, as one of the most dangerous besieging units was a mercenary band of Filipinos led by French officers. By the end of August, Rangan was forced to escape the city and flee south with the Heavenly King, but their pursuers would catch up with them and capture Rangan on October 9th. Tianhui-fu managed to hide out a little longer, at one point finding work as a field hand, and at another point being enslaved. But by the end of October, the Qing found him too. Both Hang's Rangan and Tianhui-fu would be put through lengthy interrogations. On November 23rd, Rangan was executed, ending the life of the man who nearly brought China to Christianity and modernity, and is considered by most to be the first Chinese nationalist. Tianhui-fu's interrogation didn't go much better. He claimed to have nothing to do with his father's rebellion, and explained that his own greatest ambition, if they released him, was to study quietly and to try to become a licentiate, the lowest rank of the Chinese civil service. But the risks of letting him go were too great, so on November 18, 1864, a week before his 15th birthday, the second and last Heavenly King was executed by the Qing government. The man responsible for saving the Qing dynasty wouldn't find peace after the Civil War either. Zeng Guofan ended the conflict in control of China's richest provinces and in command of its strongest armies. He was the most powerful man in the country. His advisors told him to take up arms against the Qing and establish himself as the new emperor. But Zeng Guofan remained loyal to the end. Like a Chinese Cincinnatus, he disbanded his army and relinquished his command to serve as the relatively humble Governor-General of Jiangxi, Jiangsu, and Anhui provinces, overseeing their recovery from the war. If the Qing dynasty were grateful to Zhang, they had a strange way of showing it. Until the day he died, the imperial court would viciously attack him with accusations of corruption and disloyalty. He would always be too powerful to remove, but Zhang was a man of melancholic temperament. The attacks on his character turned the last 8 years of his life into a misery. His diary, now more than ever, had become the confessions of a man longing for death. Such was the reward for loyalty in Qing China. So ends the Taiping Civil War, one of the most destructive conflicts in human history. The most widely accepted death tolls are between 20 and 30 million people. The Qing dynasty emerged from the conflict no better off than when it started, and probably a whole lot worse. The only real winners were the Western powers. The devastation of the Civil War and failure of the victor to adopt a new vision for China guaranteed it would remain a weak and easily exploitable nation for decades to come. The century of humiliations would continue. And that's the Taiping Civil War. This video was funded by Zeng Guofan and his Hunan army as a part of their propaganda to shore up support for the Qing dynasty and to drive the Taiping fanatics out of China, including his top officers, G.S. Rogers, Josiah, Pater, and the Union of X. Links to where you can join them are in the description. Like, comment, and subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one.